Next, to China, where the Chancellor has been in Beijing discussing trade and investment with the Chinese Vice Premier. The Treasury has said making Britain better off has been at the forefront of those talks. But the Conservatives have accused Rachel Reeves of fleeing to China after the pound dropped in value and borrowing costs for the government soared. Earlier on, Rachel Reeves said cooperation with China would bring about mutual benefits.
The outcomes we've agreed today represent pragmatic cooperation in action. They represent common ground being found on areas like financial services, trade, investment and the climate. They support secure and resilient growth, providing mutual benefit for both the UK and China, while safeguarding national security as the first duty of government. The total value of what we have agreed today is worth £600 million over the next 5 years for the UK economy. Overall, this government's re-engagement with China already sets us on course to deliver up to £1 billion of value for the UK economy.
Our Asia correspondent Nicole Johnston can tell us more about the speech and a seemingly warmer relationship between the UK and China.
Chancellor Rachel Reeves has laid out a new economic relationship between China and the UK, and she said that it needs to be a pragmatic relationship. She also announced £600 million worth of new business between the countries over the next 5 years. And she said that China would be launching its first overseas sovereign green bond into the UK. Now, the Chancellor didn't shy away from some of the contentious issues between the countries. She mentioned Russia's war in Ukraine. She also raised concerns about human rights and freedoms in Hong Kong. We also heard from China's Vice Premier, He Lifeng. He responded to some of those concerns. He said that China did not create the Ukraine crisis and that it wasn't adding any fuel to the fire. He emphasised that on the issue of trade, that China wants a just, fair and non-discriminatory business environment. All of this is happening in the middle of a difficult geopolitical environment for China. We are close to the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump in the United States. He is threatening tariffs on China of up to 60%. So China will have been watching how this meeting with the Chancellor has progressed. It will be regarding it cautiously, but I would say that they would have found this a very positive outcome. Positive also because up until this point, the UK hasn't imposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, solar panels or electric batteries, which makes the United Kingdom an outlier when it comes to dealing with China in comparison with the United States and the European Union.
That's the view in Beijing. Let's speak to our political correspondent Amanda Acass, who joins me from Westminster. And Amanda, despite some of the positives coming out there, she's got a fine line to walk, not least between talking about the things that China doesn't want to talk about, like Hong Kong and the Ukraine war, but also the problems back home.
Absolutely. It's always been a very controversial trip, and the stakes have only been raised in the past week with the turmoil that we've seen on the market. So, first of all, she's the first Chancellor to visit China since 2019 when Philip Hammond went. And since then, there's been a real change in UK foreign policy, with previous Conservative governments keen to keep more of a distance with China because of issues, like you say, about human rights abuses, the treatment of the Uyghurs, Hong Kong, espionage scandals and so on. And there are many who still feel that it is better to keep China at arm's length. Donald Trump, as Nicole was just explaining there, and also many MPs in Parliament. The Conservative Ian Duncan Smith, former party leader, of course, and a very strong China hawk, has argued that it's a murderous, brutal, law-breaking communist regime which won't deliver the growth that Labour so desperately need. That's what he says, arguing instead that she should have stayed at home and cancelled the visit to deal with the economic turmoil that we've seen on the markets. And indeed, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats both called for her to cancel the trip, arguing that instead she should be coming to talk to MPs about what the government was going to be doing in response to the surging price of government borrowing and the falling value of the pound, which they were blaming on her decisions in the budget. Clearly, if she had cancelled the trip, that would have been a diplomatic and quite possibly an economic disaster as well, because it would have sent a bit of a message of crisis. So she's gone ahead with the trip, and I think we'll be very pleased that she was able to make this announcement about £600 million in investment in financial services and so on, and making the case that she's fighting for economic growth.
Yeah, but still there's this huge deficit, isn't there, between what we buy in the UK from China and what the UK makes and exports. Things are very much in the Chinese favour, even after any deal or discussions that have been had by the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Well, yes, absolutely. I think the figures are something like for trading goods, the deficit's 32 billion. And in services, it's 8 billion the other way. So clearly the focus here has been on financial services, because that's where the UK is a world leader. That's why she's taken the bosses of banks and financial services firms, as well as the governor of the Bank of England, with her to try and strike more of those kind of agreements, which is what she's been talking about. Also mentioning the environment and other kind of sort of technology companies. But yes, clearly the UK, China is the world's second largest economy, and the UK is the one really trying to reach out, because our growth is so anemic, and Labour has promised to make the UK the fastest growing economy in the G7. At the moment, it's flatlining, and the government know that unless they do something about growth, not only will voters think twice about trusting them with the economy next time, but more in the short term, it's very difficult, because under the very strict fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves set herself in the budget, which she pledged not to borrow to fund the cost of day-to-day spending, with the way that the markets are at the moment, that puts a lot of pressure. She's not going to have the headroom she needs in order to meet those rules. So she's either going to have to look at putting up taxes, which she's pledged not to do, or to make quite severe cuts to government spending. Now, they've said that they're not going to reintroduce austerity, but I think there are real questions around how she's going to balance the books. A lot of talk in the papers today about whether defence could see cuts, whether the welfare bill will see cuts, disability payments, for example, all of which will be incredibly controversial. So in a way, this trip has been a bit of a break for Rachel Reeves, I might suggest, and then she's going to come back next week to really face the music at home.